Taxes come in many shapes or forms. But from a point of view of understanding their economic effects, there is a very basic taxonomy that is very useful, which is a division into two types of taxes. Taxes that are lump sum and taxes that are non-lump sum. And let me explain what we mean by that. A lump sum tax specifies a fixed amount to be paid by each consumer or firm, and this is a key, independently of their actions. It just says John Smith pays $1,000, Pedro Lopez pays $5,000, independent of what they do. And by the way, we're going to denote positive amounts as taxes, as negative amounts as transfers to the consumer or firm. In contrast, in a lump sum tax regime, the tax bill or the tax owed depends on the consumer or firm actions. And there are many types of non-lump sum taxes, as we're going to see repeatedly in examples and exercises, but just to give you one example of something we have encountered so far is a per unit sales tax by consumers. So the tax may specify, for example, that every time you buy a package of cigarettes, you need to pay $1 in taxes. Now, in this section, we want to study what is the effect of taxes on economic efficiency in isolation. Just what is the effect of introducing the tax per se? And in order to do that, what economists do is we're going to consider what are called revenue neutral tax policies. In other words, we're going to consider policies in which the revenue is returned to consumers. They're revenue neutral in that sense. That is very important. If you really want to isolate the effect of the tax policy, you want to return the revenue, because otherwise you don't know if the effects of the tax are due to the fact that you're taking revenue away of the economy or to the introduction of the tax. By making the tax policy revenue neutral, you really isolate the efficiency effects of the tax. Now, lump sum taxes have a very special property that is not shared by any other tax, which is that they do not lead to inefficiencies. Let's see why that is the case. So think of a tax policy that I'm going to denote by capital T as a vector that specifies the lump sum tax or transfer paid by every consumer and by every firm. Okay? And we're going to assume that, to make it revenue neutral, that the sum of our consumers plus the sum of our firms of these lump sum taxes is 0, so it's revenue neutral again. Now claim the deadweight loss of the allocation generated by this tax policy is 0. In other words, there are no inefficiencies. Now let's see why that is the case, why we get this beautiful result. So we want to look first at the consumers. So look at the consumers. Look at the consumer problem. They're going to have to maximize over a quantity greater than 0 how much they want to consume plus their wealth minus the tax, let's see, this is person I, that they need to pay minus PQ. Now the tax is a constant, it doesn't depend on Q, and therefore we can take it, but that implies that their demand, and in general aggregate demand, with the tax is just the demand that they had without the tax. Okay? The introduction of the tax doesn't affect the consumer problem, and therefore it doesn't affect aggregate demand. Now let's look at firms. They want to maximize over Q greater or equal than 0 the revenue minus their cost minus this tax that they have to pay. Let's see, this is firm J. Again, this is a constant. It doesn't affect the maximization problem of the firm, and therefore the supply curve also remains unchanged for the firms. But if the supply and the demand remain unchanged, this implies that the competitive market equilibrium is unchanged too, and therefore the quantity produced with the tax is equal to the quantity in equilibrium produced without the tax, which is the optimal quantity by the first welfare theorem, and this implies that the deadweight loss at the allocation generated by the tax is 0. In other words, and again, let me emphasize, it's a very unique property of lump sum taxes. They do not lead to inefficiencies. Now, if you're someone who likes government policy or is curious about it, let me just give you a preview of something. You're going to be wondering, why are lump taxes used more since they are inefficient? And what we're going to see next unit is that they have some very important limitations. So they have this nice property, but in practice they cannot be used because other limitations that we're going to study. So hold on that thought.